Hello, hello. It's me, the CT, in the CTS, the Chris Truby Show. And we want to thank you for joining us as we continue to grow here. Just 3 weeks into the broadcast, and we're already gaining some steam. Let me tell you about that in just a minute. First of all, be sure to follow us on social media, our Facebook page, The Chris Truby Show, or on Twitter, @Truby Show. Drop us a line. Just say hi and listen to all of our episodes. Right off the bat, Gopher Mike couldn't make it today. He is in the middle of moving to his new house, and we wish him all the best. I am, however, joined by my co-host extraordinaire, Fierro. What's up, dude?
It's all right. I don't have any moving to do. I have my priorities straight and ready to go.
That's right.
Talk to Mike and have some fun.
That's it. That's what we're here to do on CTS. Like I was saying, we're gaining some steam already. We finally got the new logo put up, which has me stoked. I love it so much. We've also been getting some regular feedback on the show, and one of the things that I really wanted to do is give those of you who listen a feedback spot on the show, because I want us to feel connected with our audience, whether we agree or disagree on any given topic. And so I thought I would reach into the mailbag and respond to it in real time. What do you think, Fierro?
Sounds like a plan. Let's get into some feedback.
I dig it. Let's get into some feedback. Okay, episode 1. Jim writes, "Hey guys, I really enjoyed the podcast. Thanks for not only focusing on the facts that they were terrorists, but also that this hopefully the final stamp on this president's disgraceful tenure. Thank you also for highlighting the privilege these domestic terrorists were given, even though they stormed a federal building armed and only a small number were harmed. They should have been wiped out, but since the regime controls the police and the armed forces in attendance, they were given access and allowed to keep breathing. It's disgraceful and pitiful. Anyway, great job, lads, and OM says hi too." Thank you, Jim. I'm not sure what you mean by wiped out, but yeah, we'll always do our best to call it like we see it.
A little dark there, Jim, but, I do agree there were certain liberties granted to those terrorists that may not be given to other terrorists.
Yeah. And I certainly don't advocate, and I would extend this to Fierro as well, we don't advocate the death or harm to anyone. So, all right. Moving on. Catherine writes, "Nice job, all of you. I enjoyed it." Well, thank you, Catherine, and you're welcome for your fancy new phone case, by the way. Paul says, "Chris, I really enjoyed your first installment. Tough stuff to cover, but very well done. It's onwards and upwards from here. Looking forward to the next one." Thanks, Paul. We appreciate you listening to us, and we look forward to doing this for a long time. So, yes, it is onwards and upwards from here. By the way, Paul is from Dublin, which means we have a global audience. I love it. We have a listener in Pakistan, too. Did you know that?
I did, because you told me that's who made our fancy new logo.
Absolutely, and we couldn't thank him enough.
I didn't know we were such a global brand. I like it.
We are a global brand. So cool. Thomas writes in, "Great first show. Looking forward to the next show." Thank you, Thomas. Here's one. John writes, "Hey, Chris. Professionally well done, and congratulations on your first show. Enjoyable listening. However, I feel I should make a couple of remarks, and that it's quite clear by the first 5 minutes you have nailed your political colors to the mast. And whilst that is your right, as it's your show, I think you do a disservice to the public if you don't, quote, rehash, end quote, what has taken place in the USA in the past 4 years. Whilst I don't disagree with you and your panel about the nasty mob behavior at the Capitol Hill that you covered on the show, I would view a lot of the anarchy that happened previously across the states with innocent people's businesses burned to the ground and general distraction and intimidation of the general population as worse than the assault on the government officials. It's also not a, quote, shock, end quote, to the rest of the world what is taking place. It's quite evident from the last 4 years, before the Trump mob descended on your parliament, how deeply divided the USA is. I thought them few points should be mentioned, as I think balance will give better service to your audience. Well, hi, John, and thanks for writing in, and I'm sorry I stumbled my way through that. I'll say this first up. Believe it or not, I enjoy a good discussion, and I certainly don't mind being wrong. There's something to be said for an individual who is more open to hearing other perspectives on topics that might be controversial. And I can fully admit there were a couple of things I was wrong on that show that have come out in hindsight. And I can assure everyone that it's not because I'm flying some sort of political colors or shades in between. It's because we were talking about an incident where the wounds were still open. And that was our reaction. We originally had a whole different show lined up that we wanted to do, but we switched gears really fast because what happened was too big to ignore. And to me, it's just that simple. I think there's a difference between being able to capture the essence of something, especially a singular moment that is sure to go down in American and possibly world history, as opposed to commentary on every reason why. And I think really that's what I would respond with. Here's my balance. I'm an American, right? I don't feel it necessary to stand by and watch a snake oil salesman try to weasel his way through the nation's highest elected office, incite a riot where his supporters actually stormed the Capitol building based on a lie that the election was stolen. And who stole it from him, right? The FBI, his own Justice Department, big tech, the dishonest media, crooked judges, that, oh, by the way, he appointed himself, including 3 picks on the Supreme Court. There were dead people voting, and it was George Soros' fault, and Hugo Chavez was somewhere in there, Dominion voting systems. Even his own vice president was in on this fix, right? Or maybe he just lost. That's it. He just lost. And I'm not really sure why that necessitated a riot. Nevertheless, I want you to know that I appreciate your feedback and your kind words about the quality of the show. And we want to have a great product, so we want all of you to chip in and share this kind of feedback with us. I think it's healthy. Episode 2, Holly writes, "Wow, truly wow, JT had such a journey. Congratulations on the recovery and massive props for handling so many twists and turns along the way. Thanks for sharing this story. It's so important to normalize thinking about your medical representation, advocating for yourself, and even the basic things like getting a second opinion and checking out things that aren't right. And not skipping appointments, of course. Epic episode." Well, Holly, I'll tell you, you're right in saying that advocating is important for yourself. JT's story is one that I couldn't wait to put out there, and I have to tell you, I've received messages privately from others who went through similar struggles, and here's what I'll say about cancer. It sucks. It really sucks, because even when you beat it, it still takes something away from you, and it does so in ways that, unless you've been through it firsthand, you could never imagine. I could never imagine. Cancer survivors are my personal heroes. So if you out there ever want to come on and share your stories, I'm happy to give you a platform because I want to help spread the word. If you are a survivor, just know that there's help out there, and I would encourage you to seek out help groups and anybody who can help represent you on your path towards healing. Again, thank you for writing in, Holly, and thanks to everyone who contributed feedback. We love it. Do you love it, Mr. Fierro?
I would say if our second episode inspired anybody to go get early tested, then it was a smashing success. As we said during the show, early detection is key into saving lives, and I was glad to be part of that episode. I'm glad for JT's story, and I'm glad we gave a platform for people to listen. And yes, in terms of feedback, I love each and every feedback that we got. I appreciate criticism and praise alike, and I'm just glad that there's people out there enjoying the product that we're putting out.
Same here. That's what it's all about. So before we get into today's show, we're going to take a little break from our sponsor. Don't go anywhere. Our guest is next. Okay, welcome back to the CTS. I'm jazzed about today's guest because he's such a nice guy, and he's helped so many people in his life. He is a licensed mental health practitioner and a licensed social worker, and has worked with all age groups and areas of focus ranging from HIV to those with serious mental illness. And if I do say so myself, he's one snazzy dresser. Michael Pelliccia comes to the CTS. How's it going, Michael?
Hey, I'm doing really great, Chris. Thank you.
No, thank you for being here with us. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to do the show.
It's my pleasure.
Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what made you decide to be a therapist?
Sure. I rather evolved into being a therapist, so I kind of fell into this. But my career kind of spans about 32, 33 years. I grew up just outside of Philadelphia in one of the suburbs. I attended Temple University in North Philadelphia, and there's where I focused and concentrated on social work. I got my master's in social work. And through that evolution, I kind of got acquainted with a lot of different kinds of experiences. As you said, HIV, drug addiction, hospice, death and dying, and residential rehab for drug and alcohol addicted, gay, lesbian, transgendered, and questioning folks. So my career really has run the gamut. Throughout that process, I was definitely exposed to doing some really serious kinds of therapy, getting into some serious kinds of issues, helping people in that way, and I slowly again progressed and fell into what I'm currently doing, which is pretty much entirely psychotherapy, working with many of the kinds of populations that I've had experience with dealing earlier in my career. And I love it. This is what I want to do. In the process, my husband and I, there was a time listening to you guys talk a little bit in the beginning. My husband and I were living on the East Coast. The economy had gone really sour. I'd say, what was it? The early 2000s. He got a position in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So that took us out to Cheyenne, and then evolved into, we had spent some time in Northern California, Minneapolis, Minnesota, back to Cheyenne, and now we're in Omaha. So we're kind of working our way back east, I think.
You guys are all over the place.
We have been, it's an interesting experience in the sense that in the process of that, just learning how we were different, perhaps even seen as different in different parts of the country, just because of the way we kind of view the world from our place back on the East Coast. Our mannerisms were different. We tended to talk loud. People often thought I was yelling at them when, of course, I didn't think I was. It's just that we talk loud.
Yeah.
So just really kind of a very good, educated experience that this whole thing has brought. I could go on, Chris. You don't want to hear that.
I was just curious. You said you fell into it. How did you fall into it?
Well, I mean, because every job that I had taken, just kind of expounded upon my clinical skills and required more and more of my ability to master various things like diagnosing people with mental illness, having the experience of identifying somebody, being around somebody with mental illness. I worked a lot with the incarcerated population, a lot with people who were sex offenders. So the experience was pretty wide and vast. And as I said, all of that experience kind of led into what I'm doing now. I was a director of services probably about 2 different times in my career, and a manager in another. So, actually supervising people sometimes can feel a lot like you're working with people on a clinical level, trying to understand what their needs are, trying to maximize their performance and help them to feel good about themselves and the work that they're doing. So I also had a lot of good experience in terms of my supervisory abilities as well. Prior to coming to Great Plains, as an independent contractor, I was working at One World here in Omaha, and I was the associate director for client services at One World, and that was a very challenging but very interesting experience. Gave me a lot of good, I'd say, experience information about how to do a lot of other things that I hadn't done thus far in my career.
So what about it was challenging?
Well, I mean, in today's world, there's a lot of emphasis on integrating mental health with the medical model. So doctors will often encounter in their appointments, visits with clients, not only the physical symptoms, but they can see evidence that there are emotional and mental health things going on. So it's really convenient and even I'd say efficient if they can refer right away the person to a mental health person, right? To a therapist who can then assess them further and see if they are suicidal, see if they need ongoing follow-up care. Perhaps there might be child abuse suspected, so the therapist can handle those things as well. The thing that's challenging about that, and this is just, I think it's just kind of the way it is, and there are things you can do on a kind of a personal, well, not personal, but a ground level kind of thing. But the challenge is that the medical community, they have a different way of working and looking at things, communicating about things. So there's this kind of split in the way in the way that the two kinds of professions look at things. So the behavioral health part of it looks at things also very differently, responds to them differently. And so that can be a challenge, kind of bringing them together, communicating what needs to be done. But there's not always clear agreement in terms of exactly what needs to be done. So that is always an ongoing kind of struggle and challenge. And it's not a bad thing. It just is, it's just something that has to be worked through.
Sure. It's fascinating because for people on the outside looking in, they would just assume it's all medicine.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the case.
Nope, not the case so much anymore. I mean, certainly there are places where there are, right? But it's a growing kind of model that is sweeping the country and has been for a while, especially in public kinds of health settings, and also like in situations like the VA, which I also did work in the VA for a while. It was a great experience. But even in the VA, it's called, basically referred to as integrated care. So, basically mental health and the medical are integrated with each other and working to address the whole person as opposed to just the physical or just the mental.
Now, do you think that that's because there's a stigma surrounding mental illness in this country, that we can't do both at the same time?
Absolutely. I mean, there is a stigma, and you're right. I would say, is it that we can't do both at the same time, or is it more that if a doctor were to say, I would like to see and refer you to this psychologist, once the patient leaves the office, will they follow up with that at that point? And chances are they probably won't. So the stigma definitely exists, and the integrated model is definitely been developed to help bridge the effects of the stigma. But I think stigma probably has a lot of reasons for its existence. But what tends to happen is there is this feeling in this country, right, that you just suck it up. It up and, get to work, do what you got to do. So when a person is kind of languishing with depression or really debilitated by their anxiety, people don't quite get it. And believe it or not, I mean, those messages really are assimilated by the client themselves. Like, what's wrong with me? I should just be able to suck this up. I should be able to just go to work. Why can't I do that? And then it becomes a real self-loathing kind of experience because they know they're failing and falling short. And so I think to a large degree, it's, pretty much the minority of people that actually get into mental health treatment of their own volition, unless, things go so sour that they end up in mental health treatment by having to seek emergency mental health treatment at a psychiatric hospital. And of course that happens. So that could be the first point often of intervention, is by going to a psychiatric hospital. But when you get to that point, of course, it's very dangerous.
What's the percentage of people who require that type of hospitalization over those who come in of their own free will?
I don't know that I can really give you a breakdown. I'm sure that figure exists. I would
Sure.
say, though, that it is quite high, because, again, you have people who will be trying to suck it up until they can't, until it just basically collapses around them. That's one version of what happens. But the fact, the other side of it is, a lot of people, they don't understand mental illness. They don't know that some of the things they may be doing or experiencing is really wrong, or really, really a problem. And
Yeah.
they kind of continue through, for years, perhaps, contending with some symptoms that, again, not that they're trying to avoid, but they just didn't know that, oh, that's part of depression. I didn't know that, and again, they can also end up in the psych hospital just because things have progressed and they weren't aware of what was going on, and nobody else, kind of understood that, oh, that's a symptom of bipolar disorder, that's a symptom of anxiety or OCD.
Sure.
So a lot of it is also just plain lack of education.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to another question here. What would you consider to be the leading causes of mental health issues today?
Sure. So there's no way of getting around it. I mean, one of the leading causes is hereditary or
Sure.
heredity. That is definitely that's definitely a factor. The fact, when I say do an assessment on a new client, usually if I'm looking at, say, a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, it's not at all uncommon for the client to identify that other people in their family have either, or have had either, bipolar disorder or depression or anxiety. And, that could go back a generation or two that they're able to identify that. So that's definitely one thing. And definitely mental health does have a heredity component. But that doesn't mean that, of course, just because you have it in your history, you too will have it. That's not what
Oh,
I'm
sure.
saying. But it is saying that there's a reason to believe that there's a higher propensity to have it. The other thing are, I think, particular stressors, current day stressors, perhaps even family or social kinds of stressors.
Yeah.
With regard to, our specific time that we're living in, there are an extreme a number of stressors. Now, does that mean that these things are creating perhaps ongoing mental health problems? Probably not. I mean, there's two kinds of ways to look at, say, depression or even anxiety. One would be that it's situational, right? That there are situations occurring that result in this kind of condition. The other is that it's an inherited kind of condition where what we would call more biopsychosocial, right? There's something biologically that is wrong, that is resulting in the manifestation of that condition. So two different kinds of causes, but both very real. Today's
Right.
circumstances, when you consider COVID, when you consider the attack on the Capitol, when you consider the election of President Biden and how that came to an incredibly high pitch when Trump would not concede the election and ultimately perpetuated, an insurrection, right?
Oh, yeah.
Those things. And then you've got the unemployment. You've got people who are desperate for how they're going to survive. And you have people who know those people. You have people who are dying. You have people who know
Yeah.
people who know, who know. All of that, okay, goes into an incredible amount of instability and not being able to feel like they can count on anything. There's this, there's a feeling of lack of compassion. Why aren't people, showing more compassion for the situation that people are in? That doesn't, I'm not saying that other people haven't obviously shown a lot of compassion, but that doesn't seem to be kind of spread across, everybody within the nation. Some people are not as compassionate as others. And
Oh, yeah.
we hear that. We hear that every day. But if you're experiencing these kinds of traumas and you also feel isolated and that people aren't expressing any kind of compassion, it feels very, very lonely. And those things lead to at least temporary kinds of mental illness, but it can also lead to ongoing incredible kinds of trauma. I mean, this is trauma for people. This is a different kind of trauma than what we would experience perhaps with a someone who has been raped, or with someone who's been in a car accident, or a soldier who has been shot at. But it is still trauma. It's kind of this kind of low grade, kind of consistent, kind of persistent kind of tension and trauma that just gets kind of under your skin, and it doesn't go anywhere. There's no sign of relief. So anyway, you had asked, where some of this stuff comes from. Whether we're talking about COVID or in other times of history, we're talking about other things that cause people great hardship. Two different kinds of causes, perhaps, of mental illness. PTSD, a lot of people have PTSD in our country for a lot of different reasons. I mean, a lot of kids have been abused, growing up. A lot of people have had parents who have been addicted to drugs or alcohol. All of those things can lead to ongoing trauma, ultimately resulting in PTSD. Then that becomes a lifelong condition until the person gets treated. But again, PTSD is something that a lot of people don't realize that they have. And by that, if they don't realize it, they can't get treatment, they can't get care. And many people don't even realize that there is treatment and care. So also, that's another, and I'd say deterrent perhaps to treatment, is because why would I go if there's, if I think there's nothing to gain from going?
Sure. And I think you bring up a lot of good points, specifically to the effect that people aren't going for help, because it's not like going to a doctor because you've got a stiff elbow,
Mm-hmm.
or you've got bursitis, you can't bend your elbow a certain way. That's a symptom that you can go to sleep, wake up the next day and go, oh, my elbow hurts.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't quite like that with mental health.
And, I'll say this too, Chris, is that, and Fiero, to you as well, I'll say this, is that, and this is one of the things that drew me to this career path very early on. When somebody is in anguish, right, that because they have a broken leg, and you can see that anguish on their face, and that they're in pain, and they may be crying, and they may be screaming, whatnot. But with mental health, the anguish that they're feeling is not visible. It's not readily visible, and yet that person is carrying around so much emotional pain and devastation, and that I always found to be rather heartbreaking, actually, because it's not seen. And I think that's also why very often people around someone who's in anguish like that, emotional anguish, they don't necessarily respond, or they don't respond so compassionately, because it's not very visible. If I had a lump and a gash and I was bleeding from my head, well, you'd probably respond with some compassion, unless you really hated me. But, but generally, I think most people would. But because I'm anxious and I'm pacing the floor and I can't sleep at night, people don't necessarily associate that with anguish.
It's kind of a lot to digest. I mean, it's. I guess it's sad that we're at that point where mental health is just kind of ignored. I've seen that a bunch of times, and I'm sure you've seen it. We have this, like, I live in a little village in England, and there's always these posts about people taking up the handicap spots. Because over here in England recently, they've started issuing the handicap placards to people with like legitimate mental illnesses. So they'll park there and get out, and you go shopping. And there's always these random people that will like post photos, right? Of, oh, this person was absolutely fine and there was nothing wrong with them. And it just shows that just because someone looks fine doesn't mean they are fine. And I guess that's just hard for people since they can't see it.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can't confront those people. You can't ask them. So people just assume that, they're fine and nothing's wrong at all.
True. I would go another step further, Firo, and I could even we could probably look at the person who took the picture and say, what was going on? That person, too, is in some kind of pain because they have to be that kind of vindictive and that kind of wanting to catch somebody. Like, there's a lot behind that anger and that need to want to lash out. That, in my opinion, is not exactly, normal run-of-the-mill kind of behavior. That makes sense.
Yeah. A lot of Karens do need therapy.
They do. The other thing that I think prevents people, and this is I've heard over and over again, that prevents people from getting help for mental illness is that they don't want to take medication. Medication for people is a real barrier, especially if it's more than one pill. And especially if it's more than once a day, people are real apprehensive about taking that action. And they know that if they do go, let's say, for treatment for mental illness, it probably result in, you should take this medication, and they don't want to hear it, they don't want to do it. But I mean, the reality is, I will tell a lot of my patients, but you don't have any problem doing this or taking that, right?
Yeah.
But the idea of something from pharmaceuticals really is a barrier or hindrance.
I mean, I had a question on what you thought about the rise of social media and how do you think that's helped or hindered people's mental, I guess, capabilities to because like you said, people are often reluctant to go get care for mental illness. And I, when you were coming on the show, I was reading all these studies about how social media has affected, basically the younger generation, and like it's pretty much degraded their mental health.
Yeah.
Since 2010, suicide was predominantly a male, mostly males committed suicide.
Right.
And since 2010, the suicide rate for female girls, which coincides with the rise of social media, has gone up by 65%. And there's a bunch of studies that say between 33 and 66% of that same age group suffer more mental depression than they do now because of social media. And I was just wondering your thoughts on that.
Kind of personally and professionally, I would say that social media scares the hell out of me. And it does for a number of reasons. What happens is, right, from people spending so much time on social media, regardless of whether or not they know people on the various platforms, the thing is, it's very empty, it's very shallow. There are no human connections, individual connections, or that they go long periods on social media that they're not doing anything that I would say. Not that social media can't be, somewhat constructive. I won't totally pan it, but when you're spending 8-10 hours after school on social media, what else are you doing? You're not reading. you're not interested in what's happening. You're not informing yourself of things that are important. You're not interacting with family. Think of all the things that then are missing. And a lot of parents will encourage social media because actually it gets the kid out of their hair. And again, that's not a real reason that you want to encourage social media. The other thing is too, I mean, as we learned in the, quite a bit in the last election, but we've learned it over the course of quite a few years, is that people are getting wrong information via social media. And then they don't question it. They don't question it. They're not going to other sources to check and that kind of thing. They take it at face value. Another aspect of this too, which I find interesting, and I try to talk about this without sounding judgmental, because I'm from a different generation and I understand, and people do things differently. But what I do know is that, like, young people today, they'll seek out dating apps as opposed to going somewhere and just meeting people, talking to people, engaging face to face, right?
Yeah.
So they look at somebody who allegedly has the characteristics or qualities that they want, and then they set up a date and they go and they meet them. And for those that I have experienced who do that, they will be terrified, literally terrified, to go and meet somebody in person, to walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, how are you? Is this seat taken?" Anything that would be in the least bit kind of social. So again, I think that comes out of that social media thing where there's very few areas where they're engaging others. Perhaps maybe at work, but even that's changing, right? With people working at home and working remotely. We'll have fewer avenues where we can engage people, but not engaging people leads to emptiness. It leads to something is missing. It leads to really feeling dissatisfied with one's life, which I think goes back to what you were saying, Firo, with people, their suicide rates are increasing, and women's suicide rates are increasing. So, I've had people say, "Well, I have a friend, in Azerbaijan," and it's like, which is great, right? I mean, how many people know somebody in Azerbaijan? But when are you going to see that person? Have you met that person? Have you laid eyes on them, touched them, whatever? That's a concern. That's a concern. So, and again, the quality of information that people get from that is really what concerns me.
And it's a big concern for everybody, I think.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the irony isn't lost that while social media and the rise of the internet has given you exponentially more connections to other people, people today feel more lonely than they ever have.
Right. Right.
For me personally, that happened to me one time when I looked on Facebook. This was when I was younger, and I had almost 1,000 friends, you want to call them.
Right.
And at that point, it was people that I walked past in the hall that I couldn't even remember their name. I don't know how they found me. And then one day I just destroyed all of it. And to the point now where I have like 22, but they're family and friends and people I see on holidays and phone calls, and there's like real connections there. And I feel so much happier with myself. Over this summer, I decided to pretty much stop social media, where I used to check it every day. And now I took the apps off my phone, so I have to like go to the computer to look at it. And I actually feel happier now that I'm not looking at that all the time. And it's just, I guess it's hard to explain why I feel happier, but it's just a great feeling that I don't really use social media that more.
Well,
it's
not strange to me. I totally get it.
Oh, yeah. Well, what's your social media?
I don't have social media, if I can help it.
See? That's why you're my hero. But we also want to remind all the listeners, don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram,
That's right.
Facebook.
That's right.
And that's the world we live in.
I can tell you this, right? So, and this is a very minor thing, but I think it can be amplified outward so that you can see how it goes. But I'm aware, and I'm sure other people are too, that when I text somebody, I don't really want to talk to them. That's why I'm texting them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so I'm keeping them at arm's length. And if I can text somebody kind of back and forth without ever having to talk to them, I'm happy with that. And there you go. There's your therapist talking. But the reality is that not that long ago, we used to have to talk to people. We used to have to at least address them, right? This texting somebody is not necessarily really addressing them. It's we get to hide, and that's, I guess, the big mental health piece of that is that we spend a lot of time hiding behind things, not allowing people to have direct access to us. And we have the ability to create more walls, more barriers for people to stay away. And that can become very, habitual after a while, where you just do it automatically.
Yeah, you don't think about it.
Don't think
Oh, I'm totally in agreement. If I text someone and then they call me back, I'm like, oh, what's wrong? What happened? Why are you breaking protocol?
Yep.
Oh my goodness. So I wanted to ask you a few more things. One of the tools that you use to assess specific trauma or evidence of it is called the DSM. Is that correct?
Well, the DSM is not an assessment tool. It is
Oh,
really a reference, if you will, that, say I do suspect PTSD, but I'm not quite sure whether or not they meet the full criteria. So I might then go and consult the DSM-5 and look at the various criteria just to see, does this person match up with what the DSM-5, because that's the Bible, right? If they don't
right.
match that, then I really can't give them that diagnosis, and I need to find another. So that's what that is. The assessment tools, there are many, say, tools to help you assess something. The situation would determine which assessment tool you might want to use. Or, if you're an old bird like me, I mean, you can pretty much do it without the tool. And 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 if need be, maybe just look and make sure you covered you dotted your I's and crossed your T's by looking at the DSM.
Right.
So there's a tool called the PHQ-9. That's a tool that helps assess how depressed a person is. How much of, or how high that score would determine, I'm sorry, on the severity of the depression. The GAD-7 or GAD-7 would help determine, again, let's see, anxiety level. PCL-5, and there's a couple of other ones, but the PCL-5 was one I used quite a lot. That helped determine the level of trauma, and so on. And sometimes, right, a therapist such as myself might go ahead and ask all the questions, come up with the fact that they have mid-level depression, and then do the instrument just to kind of back it up, right? Like just as
Right.
to have my back that this was correct.
So how do you go through all of this? How do you maintain a well-balanced life? I mean, you're listening to any number of people's problems all day long. How do you release that?
Oh, that's a great question, and one that I actually have needed to kind of really re-examine for myself since COVID, because
Sure.
one of my primary methods for self-care, right, as a therapist, has been to, I like to travel, and I might not travel far. I might take a 3-day weekend, 4-day weekend, or I might take 10 days. But traveling was always very important. It allowed me to get away, to see other people, to see my friends, whatever. Of course, COVID has really basically clipped my wings in that regard. And then any other kinds of, say, efforts to do self-care that I can come up with they're hampered by COVID, right? I know some people do, but I'm apprehensive to go to a gym. I'm apprehensive to do other things where there would be close contact with others. So I actually have been thinking, and don't laugh, but no, I really have been thinking maybe I could take up Toastmasters or something such as that. Um, but I have had to do some real thinking. So long and short of it is, though, regardless of who you are, it's really about having something that enriches you outside, right? And that you can throw yourself into and kind of dedicate yourself to. The other thing is that I don't know this. I don't mean. I hope this doesn't sound callous. It's not intended to, but you learn very early on in my line of work to separate yourself from the other person's trauma or the other person's disease. Okay, so what I would do is remind myself that, as upsetting as this is, right, for me to hear this, is that I would remind myself that this is their life. This is happening to them. It's not happening to me, right? Which kind of gives me the ability to help them, because I'm not drowning with them. I'm not in the water with them. We're not drowning together. I'm actually on the shore, and I'm throwing them a rope or a life preserver to help save them and get them out of that deep water. But that's just it. You have to have that space. You know, the analogy, if you get into the water with a drowning person, you're going to drown.
Yeah.
You're going to likely drown. So what do you want to do if you want to help them? Is you throw them something, you do something, extend them something, so that ideally they can then come to shore safely, and you too be safe. So that's that same kind of. I think I like that kind of analogy. That's the same kind of principle. Is that I don't get into the water with my clients who may be drowning. I try to keep that distance, but I am definitely extending them whatever I have.
That's a good way to put it.
Thank you.
Well, that's why you're the man.
That's why.
That's why you're the dude, man.
You're the dude.
That's right. There you go.
So one of the tools that I wanted to talk about, and we can talk about it really briefly here, that I've found help with is called the Enneagram. And it's my understanding that the Enneagram is a study of the 9 basic types of people, and it helps explain why we behave the way we do, and you can use it as a tool for improving your relationships with how we interact with each other on a daily basis. Would you say that's an accurate statement?
Yeah, I'd say it's for the most part an accurate statement. Absolutely, Chris. I guess the only thing that I would have probably changed a little bit is that it's a tool intended to help us identify areas of growth. So while it may share what characteristics we have, right, it gives us some insight into the patterns and characteristics that we exhibit as a result of being that particular type. It's more than, let's say, other kinds of tools that tell you kind of like how you are. It also shares with you, these are the things that don't work. Or you might even contemplate that, and these are ways in which you can elevate that.
Right. So
that makes sense. Good.
Oh no, it does make sense, and you did a much better job of explaining it than I am. Again, you're the man.
I love the Enneagram.
Yeah.
I use it with many of my patients in the aspect that many of the problems that a person might come to me with, right, have to do with the fact that things are going wrong within their Enneagram type, and then there are also 3 subtypes for every type. So something's going wrong there. In other words, if I am a type, and there is the type 1 that tends to like order, that tends to like organization, that tends to go by rules and value laws and, responsibility, right? If, let's say, I'm thrust into a situation that's very chaotic, that person might very well come to me with some anxiety. And that might be then a crisis, right, within that type. So, So I get a lot from that. There's a lot of, then again, personal growth that the person can engage and determine whether they want to change those patterns, whether they're currently effective patterns for them or not.
Right.
And you're right. I mean, it allows us to view other types and say, "Oh, I get where he's coming from now a little more, right?" And that kind of thing.
Definitely, because it's not just learning about what Enneagram type you are. It's about being able
Correct.
to, spot at a glance what Enneagram type is. Somebody you're talking with at the office, or a friend of yours, or a public figure, even.
Exactly. And then how you might be more effectively able to communicate or develop a relationship with that person where you might not have been as equipped to do so.
So if you identify as an Enneagram type 2, what personality types would you most mesh with? And for those of you who don't know, Enneagram type 2 is a caregiver.
Yes. Thank you, Chris. I am an Enneagram
You
type
are.
2.
By the way, Michael is a type 2 Enneagram.
So yes, the type 2 is known as the helper or the caregiver, which actually bristles the back of my neck. But and I know a few other 2s who would say the same.
Yeah.
The way Beatrice Chestnut is a pretty renowned person on the Enneagram, and she wrote a couple of books. But in her one book anyway, she refers to the type 2 not so much as a helper or a caregiver, but as a shapeshifter. So 2s, because of their need to be liked and to be loved, they have this need to be liked and be loved. They then will, what they will try to do is, I will try to adapt myself to be what I think you want me to be, so you will love me. Okay, so that shapeshifter. The helper caregiver part of that comes into the place of, let's say, yes, I want to do things for you, and the motive for my doing things for you, and a lot of this for any other sign too is about motive. The motive for my doing things for you is that you will like me. But with type 2s, it's not so much it's very rarely altruistic. It's very much connected to it's a transactional kind of thing, right?
Sure.
If I do this for you, then I have an expectation that you'll do this for me. And that kind of thing. So so should that not happen, I do something for you, you don't return the favor, then you could receive my ire, so to speak. So type 2s in a growth
nobody
plan,
wants
right?
to be on the end of your ire.
Right? So type 2s in a growth kind of connection, right, would be that I would need to accept the fact that, oh, that's what I do. That's not good. If I do something for somebody, I do it because I want to do it. And if I don't want to do it, I say no. 2s don't like to say no. They very rarely do say no, because again, if I say no, you won't like me.
Right.
I'm very simplifying this, but you won't like me. So then therefore I'll say yes, even though I really don't want to. But I'll do it. And when I do it, I do it. And then, like I said, there's this expectation that comes back that if I need you now, you're going to do something for me too, right?
Yeah. Well, now that I know that.
And that all has to do. Yeah. Now that you know that. Now, there's something that I think you had mentioned that is interesting, and this is true of all of the different types, 9 types, is that we have a connection to 2 other types. So for 2, I'm connected to 8, and I'm also connected to type 4. So type 8s are a very big generally big personality. They are very much in charge in a lot of ways. They can have a lot of opinions. They stand for something, and they're going to make sure that people understand, what should be done and that kind of thing.
I understand. I'm married to an 8, by the way.
Are you married to an 8?
Yes, I am.
Wow. Then you know exactly. Well, but 2s twos can look very much like an 8 when we're under stress. So under stress, I can kind of, I don't want to say, it's not a flip. It's just more like all of a sudden from out of nowhere, I get this this urge and courage to just stand up for whatever I think is wrong. It's like, and I would do that. When I was a director, I probably was an 8 most of the day. But and I would go home, I would revert back to a 2. And actually sometimes during the day, if I was dealing with say a staff person who was having some difficulty or trouble, that would be again me probably being more like a 2. And then the 4 is when I'm more or less in harmony. I would tend to kind of go back to 4s are coming for me. 4s would be more reminiscent of my ability to use those qualities and that the 4 has, and I'm kind of in harmony with that. That I like it that way. That I kind of revert back to that sometimes. So there you go. And each type now is going to have 2 types that they also connect with, which can be why sometimes when people read the types, they may identify with more than their primary type. They may think, well, now am I a 9 or am I a 7? Because they can think that those connections mean that they are that type.
And that's typically called your wings, right?
No, the wings are the types that are right next to you. So for me, my wings would be either a 1 or a 3.
Gotcha.
My 1 or 3, and you tend to favor one wing over the other for the most part. But you can say spend more time in one, and time in the other as well. So I'm a 2-3 wing.
That's interesting. Yeah. And I just wanted to make sure that point was clarified in case anybody wanted to go out and do research for this on themselves and they read the word wings, they would get a clear view of what that exactly is.
Right.
Fierro, did you take the Enneagram test?
I did. I am a 6.
A 6?
6. My wife is a 5.
Oh, cool. How about that? Do you know, Fierro, the subtype? Did you get into the subtypes or get that far?
I did not.
Okay. So for the listeners out there, each type has then 3 subtypes. So each type is going to explain the general qualities, characteristics, and then one of those 3 subtypes is going to be what really kind of resonates with that person in terms of that is definitely the way I look at things, kind of thing. And if you are, let's say you've picked a type, you read the subtypes and you're like, none of these really fit, then probably that's not your type. 6 is a very, how should I say? It's a cornerstone of the Enneagram. And that might not be exactly the word, but it is a very unique type in the Enneagram in terms of its uniqueness, but how it manifests itself. That's what I'm going to say.
Well, we always knew you were a unique flower, Fierro.
That I am. I'm a pretty flower.
And one more thing I can say.
Sure.
One more thing is that 2s, 3s, and 4s make up the heart triad. Okay, 5, 6, and 7s are also the head triad. So the heart triad, the head triad, and then you have 8, 9, and 1 are the body triad. Then you get into 2, 3, and 4 being shame is the motivator of those 3. 5, 6, and 7 fear is the motivator for those 3. And 8, 9, and 1, anger is the motivator for those 3. So everything that 2s, 3s, and 4s in some form or fashion would tend to come out of that feeling of shame that they've incorporated. 5, 6, and 7 everything that they tend to do comes out of a feeling of fear, and 8, 9, and 1 feeling of anger, and it manifests itself in different ways, in different types. That would be the core.
So basically, everything that Master Yoda warned us about in Star Wars.
Pretty much.
That's right. There you go. Hey, they believe that Homer's Odyssey actually was written by Homer in relationship to the Enneagram. That if you read the Odyssey, you will see the Enneagram unfold almost to a T.
Really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I may have to go back and read that again. I never thought about it.
Well,
So like the Cyclops and everybody represents different.
Yeah, because he makes 9 stops, right? He makes 9 stops, and
Right.
each of those stops represents one of the types.
Interesting.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating? It's a very old tool.
I always figured as a teacher I'd come out as a 2.
You would come out as a 2?
Yeah, I thought I would, but it came out as a 6. I mean, I guess it's good I'm not a teacher and I came out as an 8. I hate those guys.
Well, you and me get to be in the headspace together, buddy.
All right.
There you go. That's right. That's right. Yeah. So it's a great tool, and you can learn a lot from it.
Yeah, and don't be shy. Go out there. There are plenty of Enneagram tests. Is there one you prefer?
The Enneagram Institute has probably one of the best tools, and it doesn't cost that much comparatively. And that's the one. If you're going to take an instrument or a tool, that's the one that I would recommend is through the Enneagram Institute. But generally, I will kind of direct people to just read about the various types and then see which one resonates with you, right? I mean, you're going to be the best judge of what type you are. Of course, my recommendation is a little bit more laborious, but after all, it's helpful to know all of them anyway. So in the course of doing that,
I guess I
learning
should
about
ask.
yours is
Yeah.
And just so people know, it's only $12 to take the test.
yeah.
That's the bargain barrel low price.
And I'm not affiliated with them at all.
Yeah. And neither are we. We're not affiliated.
But, you know, if they want to sponsor us, hey, Institute, we're out there. No, this has been quite informative indeed. I've enjoyed myself.
I have as well. And Michael, I want to say thank you for being on our show today, because it was truly educational and enlightening. And I think I speak for both Fierro and Mike, who is absent today. We'd love to have you back on any other time you want.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a great experience. You guys are wonderful. I love what you're doing. I love. I really enjoyed hearing the feedback from the people regarding the other shows. So, no, thank you very much. The pleasure is all mine. And yeah, we should talk about that. I would love to come back.
Right, because I feel like we only scratched the surface here.
Yeah. Well, I do like to talk, as you know, because therapists generally like to talk in therapy.
Absolutely. Is there anything that you want to plug, or any resources that you want to point people to that might be of benefit?
You know what? There is, and it's really basically regarding drug and alcohol addiction, and the idea about why drug and alcohol addiction is a disease as opposed to a choice, which again is why there's not a lot of activity regarding that, and people basically loathe people with drug and alcohol addiction because we tend to view it as a choice, just knock it off kind of attitude. But it is a brain disease, and I can maybe share that with you at some point, Chris, and maybe you can provide the information at the end of another show.
Absolutely. And like I said, we could probably have you on for 3 or 4 shows because we, like I said, have only just scratched the surface on this thing. We haven't even gone into addiction or any of those things, all those hard topics.
All those hard topics, yet there's still mental health. They still go back to mental health.
Oh, they do. Thank you so much once again. And with that, everyone, we're going to draw this episode of CTS to a close. I want to thank all of you for listening, and we rely on your word of mouth to grow. So if you like what you hear, please share it. Drop us some love by giving us some stars, likes, or high fives. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode wherever you get your favorite podcasts, including Spotify, iTunes, and right here on Spreaker. Just search for The Chris Truby Show. For Fierro and Gopher Mike, who is moving today, stay safe, everyone, and take care. So long, everybody.